computer. Okay, I'm going to share the screen so that we know what the topic is for today. And I'll put that out as a... Okay, it's a subject called abundance. Now, of course, we know what abundance means, but in the context of today, we're going to be talking about the technological abundance and the advance that has taken place, for which we are all very grateful, no doubt, but yet we need to be aware of the advantages that accrue from it. So what I'm going to be talking about today is going to be covering this area. Now, forget for the moment accelerating the acceleration, because that's a little bit of a idea, the phrase that is used by the Singularity University. I'm using this lecture based on the talks that they have given. Now, what we are going to be covering today is the abundance in terms of the computational power that we have, which I think is very, very important for us to know where we stand on this. Then the availability of time as a result of the computation, the time that has been saved, which is again impacting our lives. So that's an important area we'll be talking about. Capital abundance. Whether we like it or not, whether we have enough money or not, yet there is a lot of capital available for supporting technological developments all over the world. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Demonetization of technology. Now, what does that mean? It essentially means that the cost of technology has dramatically reduced, and we will look at instances of that as well. Communication abundance. We all know, I mean, this has happened during our lifetime as to how big a change we have already felt. So we'll talk a bit about that. And of course, the impact on people's and creativity, and our lifespan as well. So all these areas are very interesting, and let's go into this and see what we mean by all this. Okay, here is a graph which tells us the global computing capacity. Now, we know in the old days, we had, when I first started my sort of college career here, post-graduation, when I was doing my engineering, we didn't have a computer. We were using calculating machines. That was in the 60s. And in the 70s, I was doing my post-graduation. And I had access to this huge computer called the Atlas. This was at Gordon Square near the ULU, where the University of London is. And humongously big sort of machine. And of course, even though it was so big, it had less power than what we have in our handsets today, you know? So you can imagine the change that has taken place. So this is the period that is regarding as a linear type of growth or development that's take place. And subsequent to that, just at the turn of the century, we have an exponential one happening. And this is the thing that is going to have tremendous impact on the future of society and on our lives. Now, a little bit more detail as to what we mean by this increase in capacity. Now, we're talking about bandwidth cost. You know, bandwidth is the ability for data to be transmitted from one point to another. And you can consider it like a big pipe of water. You know, if it's a big pipe, you push a lot more water through. If it's a thin pipe, you send only a little water through. So if you increase the bandwidth, that's the frequencies range, then the bandwidth increases. So that has impacts on speeds. Then computation, so that has gone down considerably. That's the arrow showing us here. The cost has gone down. Computational costs have also gone down. We'll show a few more slides later on as to how that has come about. And of course, the memory costs, the global connectivity has gone up. Sorry, this is Sarah was talking about the connect. So we are much more connected the world over. Now, there is a little phrase called disruptive here. It essentially means that the pace of change is so sort of fast that it is disrupting the standard sort of processes that we have been engaged in immensely. And we'll see a little bit more detail as we go along. Okay, what has this abundance led us to sort of have? Over the last 100 years or so, global income has increased tremendously, over 300%. Lifespan has increased by 250%. Food, a reduction in cost, 13 times less. Energy, 30 times more. So in the context of what we see ourselves being in today, despite the pandemic, think of the type of life that we had before the pandemic. And we can see this is the type of figures that would apply to pre-pandemic days. And of course, we have to wait to see the impact of the post-pandemic world that we are always talking about, and my series of lectures are concerned with that. Let's see now. Further implications of abundance. Literacy has gone up enormously over the last 100 years. Transportation, of course, has increased as well. In terms of cost, it has gone down. Communication is a lot more cheaper. You'll see examples of that as well. Knowledge, of course, we have everything on our fingertips. I can access the whole Britannica encyclopedia within minutes, without having to buy the 40 volumes, I seem to remember, because I had a salesman come to my place once and said he wants to, sell that, but that was, we're talking about the 60s. Okay, so besides creating this abundance, we are demonetizing the cost of living. So our cost of living really has gone down as well. If you take what we are getting by way of the quality of life and the efficiencies of being able to go from one place to another, to be able to, engage with other people, communicate with them so readily and so on. So to be able to do all that was very difficult at one time. I mean, in the old days, it was the case that, I seem to remember when my grandmother left for Hajj from India, it was traditional for everybody to say goodbye. In other words, goodbye in the sense that you'll probably never see them again. Because that journey, on the ship and back was so sort of, if you like, difficult and not reliable. So you can see the communication has become and transport has become quite safe and cheaper nowadays. Okay, now what has all this to do with as a race? Well, we are going to be transforming ourselves with all these resources that we have in order to raise and educate our children. I mean, children are already so far ahead in technology. I mean, it worries a lot of us when I talk to my friends, who are not so much into computing. Their sort of vocabulary is not keeping up with the vocabulary of the young people. And they're so versatile at, the keyboard and being able to do all the magical things that need to happen using computers. They're adept at it. And how else are we going to be transforming the human race with all this abundance? We'll have to see how we govern ourselves. Now, governing ourselves is our weakest link, actually. If you look at, I mean, society as a whole, the weakest link is our political system's delivery. They're not able to deliver the expected results. It seems to be a case where we take 2 steps forward and 3 steps backward sometimes. uh, okay. So what we have is a failure in many ways of a political system who is not delivering for all. It's delivering for some. It's not one which is equitable in its delivery of the things that we are looking for. So governance is the weak link. Although it is necessary for us, it depends on how good a governance we have, and what sort of people we put in place to govern us. I mean, that's an area which I think needs really to be taken a lot more seriously. I mean, we seem to vote once every 4 or 5 years, and we do it on a whim and fancy sometimes. And we bring in a lot of people who are undesirable to government. That's my feeling. And you can see already the results of that. See the USA, see we're getting out of Europe, as Brexit. You've got this people, this government in India, which is the right-wing government. So, and of course, the autocrats elsewhere in the world. So we have governance issues which are much, much more a problem for us. And invariably, technology is the one that seems to take us forward. And thanks to that. Right. We are connecting human to human, of course, through all sorts of ways nowadays. But as we progress, as we shall see, there's more to this than just talking at what we call at a tertiary level, which is through a machine, as we do through a phone or a computer. It's going to be a lot more integrated and part of our human makeup. And of course, transformation is going to sort of take place in employment. We're already seeing how how Zoom has come into our lives. I mean, before this pandemic, I hadn't even heard of Zoom, but now I think half the world is on Zoom practically, and Zoom has grown so big they don't know how to manage it. If you want to try and contact them, they take years to come back or days to come back to you. So they have to sort of build up their organization sufficiently fast. But there you are. It's the app of the day now. So that is impacting not only employment and commerce in every sphere now. That's become part of it. And of course, this we can't forget with this landing of the space station astronauts back today. Was it today, I think, or yesterday? They came back safely, and that's a big plus for SpaceX, for Elon Musk. Although his name is not mentioned, he's the guy who practically owns SpaceX. And of course, NASA also takes the credit, and justifiably so. And now we've got to remember this is happening in our lifetime. As I just talking to our new participant, Susan, change is coming in so fast. And I think we will see a lot, even with the, we are in the third age, but I think we'll probably see a lot in our times as well. Okay, I don't know whether you've heard of this guy called Gordon Moore. He's the guy who started this company called Intel. Now, Intel has been crucial for integrated circuits. They build the integrated circuits which make the computers work, your telephone, handsets work, anything of any technological sort of device, you have microchips in there. So Intel was one of the first ones to bring in these microchips, which are very fundamental to computation. And he came up with a law, which I think is quite interesting. He says that since the time of the last, from the time of 80s, I think it was, or 70s, that the computing power will double every year. So that is what we are seeing, and show you some figures on that as well. So how did this thing come about in terms of Intel in particular? You remember in 58, that's the year I left India, just a year later, and came over to UK to do my engineering. I did school, my A-levels, and then I went to college to do my engineering. And that was a time when these types of things were being developed. A thing called transistors. These are switches, if you like, in electronic sense. Now, these in 58 is the size you can see is 2 transistors. In 71, just a decade later or thereabouts, they have a, the capacity, has increased to 2,300 transistors with the same sort of size of space. And the cost has reduced to $1. See, this was much, much more expensive. So even with this type of capacity of density of transistors and chip density of transistors, it was $1. And then, of course, now we have something called the Intel Core, which has 7 billion transistors. Now, transistor is a switch. It's not a radio where we will listen to music programs on. It's a device that was developed by Bell Labs, which acts as a switch, 0 and 1, if you like. And that is the basis of computing, as you all know. So they can be very densely packed in here. And you can see it's 7 billion transistors, and the cost has become really, really quite small, a billionth of a cent or whatever. Now, this gives you in a graphical form as to how this thing has changed, increased in computing power. This is the calculations per second per $1,000 computer on this axis. And on this axis is the time scale that you've got. So in the 1900s, of course, we had electromechanical. You remember the old telephone waves and so on, dial. Then you had this relay, also electromechanical. And then, of course, the increase of calculations progressing, not that rapidly, but respectably. And then, of course, the vacuum tubes. You might even remember the days of vacuum tubes. You remember we had those radios, bulky ones, and then if you looked at the back, there were shining little bulbs at the back. There were the valves, there were the switches. They did the work of the transistors. This is the real turning point. Bell Labs in USA came up with this device here. And that brought about a humongous change. Made up of silicon, it's a switch. It's solid state. It's one piece, if you like, and just connected. And then, of course, from there, we've come into this integrated chip, which has billions of transistors, which are miniaturized. And the connectivity around there gives you all the functionality you want to do the computations. And this is where Moore's law applies to. Where it every year doubles in speed. And we are still in that sort of phase. We are here. This is up to, the graph was up to 2010, but we are not too far away. We're still having immense amount of speeds and density of calculations. Okay, another way of putting it as to how the calculations have increased in our area is that a human being has this capacity of 10 to the power of 16. So we are here. So a human being has that capacity of, because we've got 2 billion neurons, and the interconnectivity between the neurons can be humongous. And the calculation ability is of this order, they say, 10 to the power of 16, which is quite a huge number. So you've got now calculations per second happening for $1,000 computer. If you take that as a standard, it's here. We were at the human level. One human being has that amount of capacity. But by the time we come to the 2040s or beyond, because here we are in the 2020s, you see, so we are at this level of computational capability. Um, but in another 20 years, we are going to be here, and this to the power of 26, 10 to the power of 26, which essentially is saying that is the mental capacity or the brain capacity of all the human beings in the world. You see? And that capacity is all going to be embedded in $1,000 computer. Now that is sort of, that needs to sink in. It means that the whole world's brain capacity to be able to compute can be reduced down to a computer worth $1,000, and that will happen in another 20 years. So you can look at the immense sort of possibilities here. Okay, now what are the fields that are going to be employing this accelerating technological advances that we are seeing because of the computing power and the change in the way that we are exploiting this technology is here. It's going to be exploited in networks and their sensors. Now we know what networks are. Networks are all those things that enable us to send our data from one point to another. And sensors are the things that pick up signals from whatever we want to be able to measure. See? So that is one area which is going to be impacted enormously with the increased computing power. Then, of course, synthetic biology. Now, you know, there are two big fields, if I can put it much more simply. One is called the infotech, and the other one is called biotech. Now, infotech is something that has to do with big data and AI and all the technology related to something on the machine side. Now, biotech is one which is going to be involving us, integrating technology within us. Let me put it that way. So it becomes very much sowing the seeds of a new species that can evolve in that sort of fashion in the future. Anyhow, so then there's the other robotics. Robotics is the science where, you know, a robot, you know, it sort of has been introduced to us. Some of them are pretty sort of basic, but then there are the war machines that are also sort of sophisticated. But then robotics has one thing which I think we need to remember. It is different to us. Robots are not self-aware. They're machines. You know, even when you bring in this AI here into robotics, sooner or later, the combination of these two will still not give us them the self-awareness that human beings have. So if you ask any scientist even today as to what is self-awareness, they don't know where it comes from. So here is a distinction that we need to remember. You know, robotics, AI together is still, you know, a little bit away from humans in a way. 3D printing is just a way of being able to put in a program into a machine and have it control it to make that component. Now, in the case of printing, what we do is we give an ink to sort of, you know, make patterns on a paper. But in 3D printing, it's the ink is replaced by material. So the materials will then be combined together to formulate the widget, whatever it may be. So it's a very, very sort of important field in the future. In fact, they're talking about 3D being able to recreate, rather than sending up to Mars, for instance, big lorry loads of items over there. They will just send a 3D printer there, and with all the material that they will also be able to get from Mars, and put it all together to form the component that they're looking for. Okay, these are VR, virtual reality and actual reality. That's the science that a lot of people are looking at. And it's developing, and especially in the gaming area, that's become very, very much. And then of AI. AI, I'll be talking about in one of our summer lectures as well. But I think sufficient to say that it's a very, very big area. Blockchain. Blockchain, you might have heard it in the context of cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin. Now, what is a blockchain? The blockchain is really a decentralized register. When when a shop has a register or a bank has a register, they have the earnings and the expenses, and they follow one after another. In a blockchain, it's the same idea, but then it gets registered in a distributed sort of fashion wherever the servers may be, and there's a timestamp to it. So you can't, in fact, fiddle the books, because it records a transaction and it's there. You can't change it. So that's the beauty of the blockchain. See, and that technology is coming in very fast. So anyway, what the whole point of all that was that cheaper computing and all this power through all these types of areas are leading to a convergence where all this thing is going to cause acceleration in terms of change. Okay, this is an example of time. Just to give you an idea of how time also has changed in our day-to-day lives, because today we can do a lot more with our time because of the gadgets we have and all that. But in the old days, they didn't. Like in Babylon, going back 3,000 years, 4,000 years, in fact, to have this sesame oil lamp, it required 50 hours of human labor to give you 1 hour of time, an hour of light. And because you see, in those days, people were so sort of pushed for scratching a living, they had very little time to sit down and think or do anything besides having to eke out a living. And to have that extra sunlight would have meant that they had to put in so much hours of human labor to get that extra bit of sunlight. So we can see how things have changed here. So coming down to this, about 3,000 years, so that's coming to good 2,000 years later. One tallow candle, it requires 6 years of human labor to make that candle to give us 1 hour of light. So making progress. And then in the 1880s, 15 minutes of kerosene light, 15 minutes. Now what we have is, of course, this world where half a second of work, we get an hour of light, half a second. So we have immense amount of daylight to be able to not only utilize the daylight, the abundance we have is in the artificial light that we have at our disposal as well. And therefore we have time. Which in the old days, they were strapped with that, because by the time they worked hard, they were so tired they had to go off to sleep. So there was very little time to innovate and think and all that. So we are now moved away quite a bit from that type of environment to this environment of abundance. Yes, another example. If in the 1300, you wanted a 100-watt bulb for 1 month, it would have costed you 35,000 pounds. See? But nowadays, if you like, this 1,000-watt bulb can be had for a few cents. I'll just move this thing here. Yeah. So 1 month you got about $3 to $4 for 1 month. What's that much light energy? Okay, now we're going to be talking about abundance in terms of capital. We talked about computing power. We talked about the labor that we need to put in as well, how times have changed. Now we also need to have resources that you need to be able to apply and use it in order to bring about the innovations and products. And this capital abundance is something that we have. I'll just put this on top of this. Yeah. And we have plenty of it now. And in what form do they exist? It's in this one here. So you've got an unprecedented influx of cash, and it's waiting to be put into ideas. So we've got this notion of crowdfunding. We'll tell you what that is. Venture funding, venture capital, ICOs, initial coin offering, and I'll tell you what that is. Sovereign wealth funds, and these are big sort of like Emirates, and they have sovereign funds because there was so much money which is surplus to their needs. Now, here we are, crowdfunding. You could say it democratizes the access to money, which means that I can buy or give my contribution towards some development by going to a particular website and putting some money into it, and that crowdfunding is a possibility. And here it says crowdfunding reached 34 billion in 2017. Now it must be twice that figure. Then we've got so many crowdfunding platforms in just USA alone. And in crowdfunding, 300 billion by 2025. So you can see there's a lot of money waiting to go into, go in for new products where people have ideas that need to be converted into products. And this is going to be on the increase. So it's another example of abundance, see? Now, venture investing, venture capital type of thing. Here again, European sort of figures at this, Asian about this, US venture, they are much more ahead in many ways. So quite a lot of venture capital is also available. And you see a lot of these new products that we have today, like even the Apple machine, they have developed in some garage, and then venture capital supported them. They started to develop. Finally, it's a company which is $1 trillion company, and it's making humongous amounts of change to the world. So venture capital is very necessary as seed capital for supporting businesses which are exploring new ideas. Well, ICOs, initial coin offerings, these are supporting notions of cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin and all that. But apart from that, there are other sort of cryptocurrencies. And an ICO is an equivalent of an IPO. Now, IPO is the initial offering, public offering. When you want to go to the market and sell shares for your company, that's called an IPO. If you have a stock market accepting your shares, and then then there's dealings in those shares. So it's the equivalent of IPO. It's called ICO, dealing with cryptocurrency. So quite a big sort of market also developing. And the thing about this cryptocurrencies is you don't need necessarily have banks intervening all the time in transactions. Now, just to give you an example of how the banks themselves have got into the picture is, I sort of remember where I read that in the Rhine River, when the goods flowed from north to south, there were 200 checkpoints which collected tax or toll or whatever. And that little toll or fees is what the banks do when you want to move your money from one thing to another or do some service that they are offering. They take a small fee. So that transaction. Now, in the case of cryptocurrencies, you can in fact just send a bunch of numbers to the other side uh, from your wallet that you maintain. And those numbers will go into that other wallet and they can then convert it into dollars or pounds or whatever. But if they want to keep it as numbers, it stays as numbers. And therefore, the whole movement of money is taking place not physically, but just as numbers. And that has a great amount of, in fact, it's a big sort of heavy blow to the banks. I just heard on the news today that HSBC, which is my bank, they had only a profit of 3 billion, whereas for the same period they had 12 billion. And that's probably because of Hong Kong. That's more politics, I suppose, but nevertheless, and pandemic. But nevertheless, the banking world importance is going down because these will eventually become much more easier ways of utilizing transferring value. This is one of the banks. He's quite well ahead in his thinking. He's trying to collect a fund when these convergence takes place of all these. They would be needing money and they would have to go somewhere, and he's already got enough thing there. And these can be converted into cryptocurrencies, which can then be easily transferred from one thing to another. But the starting point has to be something solid, which is money. So banks will not necessarily, die out. They will still have, but a lesser role. Demonetization, and what that does mean, it just means that the costs are going to be lowered. Now, if you look at this, see the bandwidth costs here. And can you all see the screen or the? Okay, let me put it that way. You can see from 1992, this is dollars per gigabyte per second. That's the bandwidth. That's a measure of how fast you can push this data through. That used to be about $1,200 in 1992 for a gigabyte type of thing to send to.
Shafiq, can you just explain that again? I don't quite understand what you mean.
You see, when you have data to transfer from one place to another, how much you can transfer depends on the frequency and on the bandwidth, as I said earlier on. So if that, and you could say it's like a pipe. The bigger the pipe, the more higher frequencies you can push through, and therefore the larger amounts of data. So to push that amount of data per second, in that year, cost you $1,200. See? Now,
thank you.
Now it costs only less than $1. So you can see tremendous amount of change has taken place in the time in our own lifetimes, and that is going to be very, very significant. And this is also the computing cost. The cost has gone down in just 28 years here. And this is dollars per million transistors. We talked about transistors. These are the switches we're talking about, zeros and one type of thing. 1 million transistors would have cost you that much, and now it costs you less than a cent. So you can see an immense amount of advantage to be had. As storage costs here, how much you can store. The data needs to be stored somewhere. So you need to have memories, and those memories were quite expensive. and that cost has come down to practically zero. Even in our handsets, we've got, immense. We've got, 120 and 256 gigabyte type of storage, which is humongous. Now, because all these things are happening, in the old days, it used to take about $5 million to have a startup. So if you have an idea, you want to start up, you'd have to, find so much money about 20 years ago. To buy the setup, the office, the computers, the stationery, whatever else, and pay people. Now the startup costs, if you like, over the years have gone down to $500,000, $50,000, and to $5,000 in 2011. Now it's probably 1,000 probably now, because it's probably started from home, whatever you want to do. So you can see the tremendous advantage that is accruing from the technology that is racing ahead. Okay, communication costs. Get an example. If you wanted to make a call from USA to India, see, from there, USA to India, it was $10 a minute. Now it's 1 cent a minute, or even less. So 1,000 times cheaper. So it's humongous. Now, in fact, not even less. We can talk for free. If you're connected on Wi-Fi or WhatsApp or what have you, although you pay your monthly cost for a provider, but nevertheless, most of the stuff is now practically negligible cost. 5G, our friend, we've had this discussion. The 4G, these are the speeds we had, kilobytes per second, quite fast. And then 4G, 100 MB, that's megabits. So it's kilobits here, megabits here. And then 5G is gigabits. You see? Now, this is where it's become very political because of Trump. If Trump wasn't around, we wouldn't have had this controversy. And we would be well placed to exploit the new technology. But now, because we want to say, yes, sir, 3 bags full, sir, to Trump, we are also saying, no, we don't want to go, with Huawei. So that's a bad mistake. Okay, explosion in networks. Networks, we've got all these types of networks we are familiar with. Our SPs have identified themselves as different networks. And then, of course, social media is also a network. And you've got this Facebook guy, Zuckerberg here, connecting about a few billion people all over the world. And Google putting up these balloons to provide connectivity to the unreachable areas of the world. But that's not a big success. The success is going to be by another guy who's not mentioned here. So it's Elon Musk who's really going to make the difference there with this Starlink. We've already talked about it in my earlier lecture. So Starlink is a global type of network which will allow all areas of the world to have access to internet. You don't need to dig up and put cables all over the world. It's just satellite. You just point it to your satellite and then connect it to your computer, and you're connected to the world. So it's as simple as that. So that technology is already under development. They've already put up 600 satellites. They're still, are planning to put thousands more, and we'll talk about it more. I've talked about it before. Okay, what is this global connectivity going to mean? See, so far, only half the world, this green areas, is half the world connected. This is the total population. Half is connected to internet. See here, internet users, global. Now, by 2022, with Starlink comes on, we're going to have global connectivity. You see? And what does that mean? It means that the remaining 4 billion people in the world are going to get connected. I mean, that's a sobering idea. And what does that mean? It means then they will be using that connectivity to create products, to discover knowledge, using computers, become consumers, entertain themselves, provide and invent. So tens of trillions of annual, so innovation is going to also accelerate. It's a bit like saying that if you're on your own, maybe you can do a bit, but if you're two or three people together, you can do that a lot more, faster and better. Right. This connectivity is not just going to be at the level of what we are familiar with, but we are going to go beyond that, and we're going to be talking about. I talked about Neuralink, I think, at my other lecture some couple of weeks ago. He's working at it, and what that does is that it allows, and all these other companies are also working away, along with countries like China and Russia, and of course USA, to connect ourselves to the cloud. So we put a little chip in our cerebral cortex, and that picks up all the signals, and we can in fact direct those signals to the cloud and retrieve information from the cloud. And we talked about some of the other benefits from Neuralink, about bypassing Alzheimer and paralysis or all those types of things, epilepsy. Okay, it has all these types of things. We think it'll happen by that date, another 20 years from now. But some further people in the know think it's going to happen even faster. And it's going to increase our longevity. So you can see you're young here, you're getting a little bit older here. But then, of course, our age is going to mean the old 100 years means it's the new 60. So you can look forward to becoming teenagers again, perhaps if you're long enough. And they say the longer you live, the more chances of you, in fact, living even longer. So you've got this fantastic future ahead of us, and we are living in this time now. So be happy on that, and that's all. So we have now time for a little Q&A.
Thank you.
I'll stop the share and make it thing there. I'll go for the other mode. Okay, here we are. Okay, now hopefully it wasn't too rushed, because there was a lot to cover there, and I'm sure it is a future that we are all looking forward to. Yeah, George. Can't hear you. Oh, sorry, I have to unmute you all.
Who's going to enjoy this? Everybody or just an elite?
Well, I think if you have these connectivity being offered to the whole world, and they are then linked up, they are also going to become, I think, part of the global advances that take place, because it makes a tremendous difference. Take India, for instance. I come from there, and therefore I'm quite familiar with all the trials and problems over there. One of the companies introduced what they call the bio card, which is the ID card, which is biometric, and therefore immediately what that meant was that within the period of a year, those people who didn't have any documentation became visible. So the government could do something about it. Through this visibility, they were able to sort of address their needs by giving them ration cards and support, all sorts of things started to happen. So what this means is that the common man starts to benefit as well. Okay, we are not saying that the rich are going to stay where they are. The rich are going to go even further ahead by being able to manipulate their genomes and have, those types of facilities at their disposal. So we can't completely rule out inequality, but we certainly can improve the situation from the present.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Isn't there something that I can't remember what it's called, but it's part of our genetic code that
DNA.
no, but it's the thing, the telomeres on either, you know what I mean, that they get shorter and shorter, which means that as they get shorter, so your life expectancy reduces, because they're the things that are at the end of each genetic strand. Do you know what those telomeres are? Have you ever
No,
heard
I don't know them. No.
Oh, it's like a little cap at the end of a gene. Okay, and as they get shorter and shorter as they I
As
can't
one
think.
ages.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. Is that because of mutation taking place, or
I
just
think
a
so.
deterioration of the?
I don't know. That's why I was
telomeres?
asking the question. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. But it's
Yeah.
really interesting. I've seen that CRISPR thing. I saw a big program on it quite a long time ago. But I do remember that being part of the thing, that they can manipulate your genes now.
That's right. Well, CRISPR is like an editor.
Yes.
Cuts out little bits of unwanted, DNA, and supplements it with the better ones.
Yes.
It's a great tool. So
Yes.
we'll see how that works in the future.
And do you think that we will become a cashless society?
A class.
Well,
see, the classless society has much to do with the political will. The political sort of dilemma we have is that they're controlled not by the public so much, but by forces that control the public, like the media, like whatever else there may be. So what we've got to strive for is some equal opportunity, which might sound like socialistic notions, but there's nothing wrong in those types of notions. We need to be able to give the opportunity to everybody and not take away the opportunity. So in that sense, we need to go some distance towards having a model which delivers on that. At the moment, our model is, capitalistic, which means people with capital have the advantage. We need to sort of come up with something which is going to make it easier for everybody to be part. So we're in this all together. We hear that phrase all the time. It's only when there's a problem that we're all in together.
Yeah.
Yeah, Susan.
So, your last point on the 8 points of where we're accelerating is in longevity. And even if we stay healthier, unless the birth rates go down dramatically, which I believe they are doing, I mean, the population will expand to a very, very large extent. So with abundance, the world has to be able to cope with that. And there'll still be an imbalance in terms of age range, even if older people can still be more healthy than older people are now. There will be quite a long time, I would think, that there will be far too many older people, a proportion of whom will not be very healthy and not be able to be incredibly active, compared with the number of young people to support them.
Yeah.
So, things may happen, but they may not all come out with good consequences. As much as we like to think of ourselves being the lucky ones.
Yeah, I think one of the sort of things that we can also recognize is that this technology that is coming in is going to be taking away a lot of jobs as well.
Yeah.
You see, and it has already done that, because we have seen a lot of these jobless people, bringing in these rightist governments in Europe and USA, everywhere. And what we have to remember is, I think, that the wealth that needs to be created will still continue regardless of the unemployment. And how so? Well, because it's the machines that produce the wealth. If you look at the job losses in the West, 80% of them are due to automation. And so the wealth gets created by the automation or robots. And what we have to do is to have a type of government kitty which supports this notion of UBI, universal basic income, so that we are able to give money to everybody so that their kitchen can be operating, and it gives them a bit of time to develop their own sort of ways of being productive and creative. So I feel that despite the fact that we have a lot of inequality in the world, technology is trying to even that up. And once the automation starts to sort of kick in a lot more, then wealth is certainly going to be created. And then it's a matter of redistributing that wealth in a manner which works for everybody. So there is no real fear to say that, well, we are burdening the young people because they have to sort of look after the older people and so on and so forth. That's not going to be the case, in my opinion.
Right. But you also have this, if jobs are going and people have effectively more leisure time, we almost have to change the ethos that gives such a value to doing work. I mean, satisfying work, because at the moment, I think people who are not in jobs are not suffering financially, but they're suffering because they don't feel valued. They don't have a feeling of self-worth because they don't feel that they're doing something productive. I mean, it's a whole change of mindset.
Yeah, you see, our educational system has been to create workers for the factories and for the offices. And therefore, we have gone through, ages like that, where we are dependent on the state or somebody or the other giving us the job. I think we need to have an educational system which is not necessarily to fill up the offices and factories, but rather being able to have productivity and creativity, which they can combine, to get together to formulate whatever it is that they want to do, or independently. So it gives us that complete new area to do the type of life that we want to lead. Yeah.
Yep.
So, Pam, I can't hear you.
I've got a lawnmower going outside, so it's going to be quite noisy.
Well, we can't hear.
Oh, good. I was just going to say we live in interesting times, very. But I saw a program a while back about robots and how the elderly were going to be looked after by robots. You'd have a robot chair, and every 20 minutes it's going to make you get up and move around, and that kind of stuff. It's possible that a lot of this caring of the elderly could be done by robots.
Yeah,
possibly.
we think of robots as as just being a very, very simple sort of devices, but they'll become very sophisticated. And it'll be difficult to tell whether it's a human being or not. So, and that's going to happen, not like, for instance, there's a newscasters that I've seen in Japan, I think.
In Japan, yeah.
Who read the news, and you can't tell whether that's a lady who's doing it or a robotic lady.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
And on a class I attended this morning, I heard that John Lewis is shutting down their stores, and they're going to create homes out of them.
Oh, right.
Because of all this shopping, online shopping, they don't need the big stores and convert them into homes, which it's already happening. It's
yeah. Because this pandemic is a wake-up call for us to really revise our ways, and particularly the governments have got to sort of take the initiative here. And I think we talked about, the thing about rather than just giving rescue packages and stimulus, they should sort of push towards a greener type of agenda and re-education of the society and public. But how smart the government is very questionable, because I started by saying, the weakest link in society are the politicians and our governance. And we have to sort of really keep a watch on that. Let's hope that we can make good decisions. Because at the end of the day, although we think that human beings are very selfish and not caring, but the very fact that human beings require a society to live in, they're social creatures. So that tells me that they want to cooperate and think about others as well, and not necessarily do the others sin. Of course, there's going to be some bad eggs. It all depends on the basic early life that they've had, and if there's a lot of injustice. So the pursuit of justice, I think, is very, very essential. And I think then so we need to keep that in mind, that our well-being is with our neighbor, and not necessarily just on our own.
Yeah. Please God.
Yeah, Maureen, I haven't heard from you. You've got your mic off. No, your mic. I'll unmute you. Okay.
Can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now.
Oh, right. Yes, very interesting. I did see actually a documentary on Japan with AI, and they are, I don't know if anyone else saw it, but they are so far ahead that they even have pets that resemble their dogs so much, and companions for their kids to keep them quiet so that they can have fun going out. So I think they're quite advanced in AI.
Yeah. As countries go, Japan is very, very sort of ahead in so many ways.
Yes.
And as far as automation is concerned, the fields that do get a lot of funding and all that, of course, is the sex industry as well. So you've got a lot of these sex dolls and what have you, or companions as they call them. They're very much part of that scene as well.
Yes.
And so it's going to be coming in all sorts of ways. And
but it still feels very spooky to watch. It feels very spooky when you watch it. All this love and affection to say towards a dog, and you realise it's not a dog at all.
Yeah.
It's weird.
Yeah, I think we'll have to, we as a species, you know this Harari, Professor Harari from Israel University, I think. He wrote this book, Homo Deus and Sapiens and all that. He talks about how we, as a human species, are going to be changing into a newer species, which means that we'll have a lot of external parts to us, and that may extend the range of experience and knowledge and so on. But certainly we will be passing that on to the children genetically, I think, so that we become a new species. Yeah, so we'll see.
Is this done with
Do you
artificial
think?
insemination?
Sorry, George.
Is this done with artificial insemination?
Sorry, again.
Is this done with artificial insemination?
Yeah, well, I think it could be experimental wise, but it's a question of how advanced that field is going to go, because we are a product of millions and billions of years of evolution, and to be able to bring in these sort of things very quickly is not going to be possible, especially where this biotech is concerned and impacting our genes to that point where we do it naturally, or whether we have to do it artificially.
So do you think that men will become redundant as a species?
Yeah, well, I think they have been redundant for a long time anyway.
I think we'll all be asexual, I think that's the word for it.
Amazing. I must tell you that I saw a program the other day about the Komodo dragon, and they were trying to breed them. However, there was one that they actually got isolated on an island alone, and actually started to produce eggs and hatched out more. There's some sort of survival instinct that actually helps them when there's no male around to actually produce an egg that you can hatch without having where the female combines both the male and female DNA, whatever it may be, that will actually fertilize an egg. It's extraordinary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that single sex type of notion, I think there is something in the animal kingdom that they lay eggs and fertilize themselves.
Yeah, they're on some
idea.
Yeah, it's just extraordinary. Yeah.
hermaphrodites. I don't know which animals they are.
Yeah.
Men will become redundant.
You have hermaphrodites where they don't need males at all.
Yes.
Hollies.
Yes.
So men may be redundant.
Exactly. That's why I'm asking the question. I just think it's fascinating. It occurs to me. Guys,
you see, one of the
will you forgive me if I have to go because it's getting on a bit. It's 10 past almost. So forgive me. I'm going to just say goodbye to everyone. I'll try and catch up the rest when I rewatch. I always rewatch it because there's so much.
Okay, have a good day then, Ross.
And to you. I'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Okay, do you all want to finish up now?
No, don't finish because of me. Let me.
Okay, well, those who wish to continue a little bit longer, that's fine. Okay, Ross. I think the notion of the future, I think, is still, we are not able to predict which way we're going to be headed because the change is happening so fast. I would think that sooner or later we need to have this type of conversation as to whether robots will have rights and whether they become integral to our families and all that. Society is going to have to change, and we'll have to adapt. And I think it's good. We'll have to face new challenges of that sort.
How do you think that government would respond to that, to the changes that really are required?
You see, I had a theory which always worries people when I mention this.
Let's for it.
I said that the government has already embarked on a scheme which they consider themselves to be a PLC. It's a company, and therefore they're looking at society and see how productive anybody is and how less productive or not productive at all. And they will look at the oldies like us, and they say, here is a group that's taking 80% of the budget of NHS.
Yeah.
They occupy big houses, they're taking pensions, they're free transport, and they're not productive in terms of GDP contributions. So why do we want them? So the question that gets answered this way, which is worrisome, well, all they have to do is to not fund the NHS because that's where we all end up sooner or later. And if there's not proper funding there, they're not going to survive very long once we get to the hospital. So I wouldn't be surprised that, if there is some guy sitting in some backroom office and saying, look, we've got too many oldies in society.
Mm.
What good are they? And I, being an oldie, I object to that, of course.
I think his name is Dominic.
Oh yes, absolutely. And let's send them all with COVID to the care homes and cars.
George.
Yeah, on this very point, this so-called virus, which I don't think exists as something else. No, I do think something. The people who are getting ill are the people who are wearing masks. The people who don't wear masks don't get ill. The people who died are the people who wore masks, and the people who lived are the ones who didn't get masks. I think that the policy is to get rid of a lot of people now, and the way you can guarantee that they will be ill is to get them to wear masks, and they're breathing in this stuff in their, like it's going down into their lungs, it's going into their brains, and anyone who says the opposite, anyone who says what I'm saying, is immediately ridiculed. They're banned from talking on the media, everything. And I feel very sorry when I go out in the street and I see what I see as mugs. I do. I think they're mugs who are wearing these masks and everything,
But George, why do you think wearing masks is going to make you ill?
Huh?
Why do you think wearing masks will get you the illness?
Well, because you can't breathe out properly, because you're breathing in bacteria all of the time. You're breathing it in, it's going in the nose and it's going down the lungs, and you can't get out. It's proven in America, in Japan, and all these countries is that, they're saying, if you wear the mask, you're going to get ill. These are the doctors saying this. If you wear the mask, you're going to get ill. And I'm afraid that the people have been brainwashed here. Totally brainwashed. They're brain dead, most of them.
Oh, well, that's me. I'm brain dead. I think on that note, I really do have to go anyway.
Okay, we'll say goodbye for the moment.
Yes.
We'll carry on, George. It's an interesting idea.
No, I speak to nurses, I speak to doctors regularly, but the hospitals are empty at the moment. There is no one in them, right? They haven't got anybody to treat, right? Out of the 40,000 people who died in this country, right? 25,000 died in care homes, right? 15,000 other people who died in this period of time. It's not a lot of people, it's difficult when someone dies. They died of other things, natural causes. I live in sheltered home, in what they call sheltered housing. It's community housing now. Not one person's got ill here. I don't know anybody who's got this virus. I think it's an enormous scam to depopulate a lot of people. And I think that there is something out there, but it's certainly not the coronavirus.
So what are you saying? You're saying that we should not use masks. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, definitely. Definitely. Because you've got to go out and you've got to breathe in and out, and you need vitamin D and stuff like that. And also, if you wear a mask, you're carrying fear. And fear also has an effect on the body.
Interesting idea, George. Anyway, shall we call it a day now?
Yeah.
Right.
Okay,
Yes.
bye-bye. Thank you,
Thank you.
everybody. I've got the recording. Maureen, send me your email, and Susan, I should have asked her as well, because then I can send you the clip.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
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 Bye.